Story 1. Frank William Abagnale of Catch Me If You Can. It turns out the biggest con he pulled was convincing the world that he was the biggest con man. Story 2. The Woman King. They were slavers who fought to continue enslaving their neighbors and profiting from it, not to end slavery as the movie claims. Story 3. Bohemian Rhapsody. I am old enough to remember the last few years of Queen with Freddie Mercury, and I was thoroughly confused during the movie. Story 4. I think one of the latest to make the news is The Blind Side. Story 5. Captain Phillips. He wasn't a hero. He was a scoundrel who sailed too close to the pirate zone to try to save a nickel on fuel and help the company's profit margin. Multiple crew members advised against his decision, but on board a ship, the captain is essentially in charge. The next part of the true story requires some knowledge about the United States Merchant Marine. American merchant ships are divided into 3 crew departments: deck, engine, and steward. The steward department handles food and accommodations. They run the galley cafeteria and make sure everyone has beds and bread. Their department leader is chief steward. The engine department runs the engine room. They ensure propulsion, power, and repair any major mechanical issues. Their department leader is the chief engineer. The deck department handles everything else, from steering to mooring, tying up, to painting. Their department leader is the chief mate. The "look at me, I am the captain now" moment was more or less true, but Captain Phillips told his crew that although the pirates were in charge, he was handing over leadership of the vessel's actual crew to the chief engineer. He knew he had made a mistake, and nobody trusted him. The chief engineer had more time on that ship, more time with that crew, and was a real leader. You might say that relinquishing command to the chief engineer was the one true moment of leadership in the whole chain of events. It was omitted from the movie because Hollywood didn't want to explain all of this and preferred a simple hero. It was the chief engineer who rallied the crew and worked with the United States Navy to save the day. But most people don't know what a chief engineer is, so they made a movie about Captain Phillips. Story 6. Both A Beautiful Mind and The Imitation Game had very little to do with reality. Story 7. The Greatest Showman is not exactly a biopic, but it sanitizes and romanticizes P.T. Barnum's life and omits many of the terrible things he did. Story 8. Lone Survivor. The real story is comparatively sad. Navy SEALs took on a mission originally planned for the Marines. The Marines already had a solid plan, but the SEALs dismissed it as ineffective. The Marines knew the area had little air traffic, so an insertion via helicopter would be noticed. They planned to go in on foot. The SEALs insisted on using helicopters and tried to conceal it by having the Marines fly over the area frequently before the mission. They also left a coil of rope the size of a CrossFit tire in the woods because the crew cut it instead of pulling it back in. The debate over the fate of their captives was not a moral quandary. They intended to kill them but assumed insurgents would find the bodies. The movie shows large numbers of insurgents entering through the woods, but official reports estimate only 15 to 20 fighters. Considering that Marcus was retrieved after firing almost no ammunition, this seems more accurate. Marcus did not stab a Taliban fighter to death during an assault on the village where he was held before being rescued by Marines supported by a gunship and helicopters. He was moved from house to house for several days until the military rescued him. No battle occurred. The man who helped him fled the country after the Taliban decapitated one of his family members. Some details may be incorrect as I have not researched this recently. I learned about it while using the movie for a high school presentation. Additional information from other sources. The SEALs brought inadequate radios for operations in the mountains of Afghanistan. The Marines were ready as a quick reaction force, but Naval Special Warfare commanders did not deploy them because they tried to manage the operation from a distant base and were confused about the situation. Claims that one of the men survived up to 8 days after the engagement do not make sense medically. He would have been heavily injured and unlikely to have had enough water to avoid dehydration from the environment, exertion, and blood loss for over a week. Reports state 2 men were killed by gunshot wounds to the head, and the third died from multiple gunshot wounds to the body. I was also incorrect about Gulab. He and his family were attacked multiple times, and his nephew was executed by a gunshot to the head. Story 9. Patch Adams completely fabricated and misrepresented the beliefs of the real man it is based on. Story 10. Rudy, the scrappy little football player with a lot of spirit and heart. The real Rudy heavily embellished his story, made himself a hero and inspiration, and persistently contacted movie studios until one agreed to make his made-up feel-good story. The scene where the team carries Rudy was more ironic and joking in real life. The team was not doing it out of pride and respect. Story 11. Aaron Brockovich. The residents of the town did not get a happy ending. It took years to receive a payout, and half of it went to the law firm representing them. The residents received varying amounts, but it was not enough to significantly improve their lives. However, some good news for them is that it is now proven they are not at a higher risk of cancer as originally thought. Story 12. Bloodsport was supposedly based on a true story, but it is most likely that the person made it all up. It is unclear if that counts. John F. Kennedy is mostly fiction. Pocahontas changed many things. The movie 300 was not trying to be entirely accurate. Story 13. The movie American Sniper starring Bradley Cooper is largely fictional. The real-life person portrayed had significant personal controversies. Story 14. I always thought The Perfect Storm was hilarious because they all die at the end. The writers know literally nothing about what happened to them except that they went fishing in a boat. Everything that happens after they leave port is completely fabricated. Story 15. Catch Me If You Can because Frank Abagnale even said he made most of it up. Story 16. U-571 makes it look like American forces bravely captured the Enigma machine. They had absolutely nothing to do with it. Story 17. Remember the Titans? The only parts that stayed true to the team were their impressive track record and the car accident of Jerry Bertier, which did not occur until after the season was over. Story 18. Devil's Pass is about the Dyatlov skiers, but the joke's on me because it didn't say it was based on a true story. I had a healthy drink of whiskey and sat down thinking it was really what happened. I freaked out at one point, let's just say. Story 19. Fire in the Sky. I prefer tall whites over reptilian grace. That being said, it is kind of a perfect horror movie. It shows just enough. Story 20. The Strangers, everything after the knock on the door was made up. Story 21. U-571 is a 2000 film about a United States submarine crew's attempt to steal an Enigma machine from a German submarine. The film was criticized by the United Kingdom Parliament as an affront to the real sailors. To make matters worse, it stars John Bon Jovi. Story 22. Anastasia. Grand Duchess Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanov did not survive her capture by the Bolsheviks. She was shot and killed alongside the rest of her immediate family. Grigory Rasputin had been dead for over a year when this occurred. There was no Dowager Empress, while Maria Fyodorovna did survive and was known by this title. The monarchy had already been abolished before the Romanov family's murder, so she was no longer an empress. Sadly, there is no happy ending and no talking that. Story 23. Netflix's Queen Cleopatra, categorized as biographical and documentary, takes historical race representation to a whole new level in modern Western media. Story 24. Young Einstein takes a few liberties with Albert Einstein's life, if I recall. It gets the main points right, for example, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared and Marie Curie being Polish-French, but apart from that. Story 25. At the beginning of the big year, it states, the following is based on a true story, only the facts have been changed. Story 26. Midnight Express and the Turkish Prison Guard. The actor admitted later how fake it was, and we also know the movie was funded by a Greek person who was laughing the entire time. Story 27. Without hating the movie, the Buddy Holly story is quite far from reality. I still love Gary Busey's performance and the movie as it is. I do dislike the Doors movie for being quite inaccurate, but I do like Val Kilmer's portrayal of Jim Morrison. Story 28. Tropic Thunder is a movie that happens because of a lie. Someone claimed to be a veteran and sold a story that did not really happen. Story 29. Open Water, 2003. The only true part is that the two divers, Tom and Eileen Lonergan, were left behind by the dive boat because the crew failed to do a head count. The rest of the movie is complete fiction. Story 30. Strictly on a technicality. The premise for Nightmare on Elm Street was based on an article about Hmong refugees who had escaped Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia but were then haunted in their dreams. According to the article, they all died from undetermined causes not long after. Story 31. The sound of music is somewhat inaccurate, but I still love it. Story 32. Most World War II films and internet historians reviewing Dunkirk come to mind. Dunkirk was completely leveled, and the beaches were supposed to be packed with sailors trying to escape. Yet the film looks like a mall at closing hours with a handful of people wandering around. Especially with more old footage being remastered and recolored, you can see how clean and sterile many war films are compared to the actual battles and events. This does not even mention all the propaganda that turned certain men of the era into myths and legends, exaggerating their exploits and accomplishments. Story 33. Maybe not the farthest, but I was disappointed in Foxcatcher. They did not really go into details about how troubled DuPont was. They skipped over how intense his standoff with the police was and how truly unwell he was. It was not very clear in the movie why he killed Schultz. I do think Mark Ruffalo did a fantastic job as Schultz. Carell was alright too, but I was disappointed in the way they told the story. Story 34. The Revenant. He did not have a child. He did not kill the men. The man's life and story were very interesting, and there was no reason to change it. Story 35. The Fourth Kind is a Mila Jovovich movie about aliens, in which she plays a therapist who uses hypnosis to unlock people's memories of being abducted. The film includes real footage of these sessions using different actors, but it is entirely fictional. Story 36. The Perfect Storm. Once the ship leaves port, the rest is fiction. Essentially, a ship sinks in a violent storm, and that is the story. Story 37. The Terminal was supposed to be based on a true story, but it is very far from anything of the sort. Story 38. The Audie Murphy story. They reduced how incredible his actions were. Story 39. Bravo 20 by Andy McNabb. True story of a special air service raid into Iraq during the Gulf War that went badly. The story contains a lot of aggressive and macho content, although there were rumors from the Special Air Service that it was mostly fabricated. A Channel 4 reporter decided to investigate a few years later and followed their trail. It turns out that McNabb's story was highly embellished, to say the least. Story 40. While the idea of recruiting players using the Moneyball method was accurate, the movie overplays it. Many key players during that season were recruited using traditional scouting methods. Story 41. Sully. The National Transportation Safety Board being portrayed as evil and trying to go after Captain Sully was nonsense. Story 42. John Waters put a based on a true story card at the beginning of the movie as a joke, but it was entirely fictitious. Story 43. Wolf Creek. How could we possibly know everything that happened to those two girls when only the man who was chained up alone in a cave got away? Story 44. Probably Weird Al Yankovic, the story, but that's the point. Story 45. Freedom. Ahem. Braveheart. Story 46. Any biopic. They are all whitewashed versions of generally unpleasant people. Story 47. This may be a controversial opinion, but I felt that Weird did not get some aspects right. Story 48. Iron Claw was a great movie, but it left out many important details, such as entire tragedies and additional siblings. Story 49. Domino. I believe it says that it is loosely based on a true story. Story 50. 13 Days. Kenneth O'Donnell was recalled as having been present but essentially a silent observer with no substantial contributions to finding a solution to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Since Kevin Costner was also the producer of the film, they made his character seem indispensable. Story 51. Coal Miner's Daughter, hands down. The movie says that Loretta's husband, Doolittle Lynn, was her Svengali who made her famous. Her autobiography says that her family were already singers and musicians, and Doolittle had nothing to do with it except marrying 13-year-old Loretta, beating her, cheating on her, and getting her pregnant repeatedly. I can't ever watch the movie again after reading the book in the 1990s. Story 52. Argo. The Canadians did everything. The ambassador was actually working with the Central Intelligence Agency to get the Americans out. It went so smoothly there was no dramatic airport escape. Story 53. The Blind Side. Also known as the white savior trope defined. Story 54. There were 7,000 Greeks fighting alongside the Spartans. Leonidas dismissed them when he realized it was a losing battle, and his men protected their retreat. However, a few thousand remained. Story 55. The only similarity between the real Mothman story and the Mothman prophecies is the word Mothman. The real story is fascinating, but the Hollywood adaptation produced a fictional story of poor quality. Story 56. The Ten Commandments. There is no archaeological evidence of the Exodus story. It is most likely a fictional tale created to support feelings of divine destiny. Story 57. So we bought a zoo. They moved it from Southwest England to California, literally from probably the wettest place on earth outside Washington state to California. Story 58. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, and Silence of the Lambs are all loosely based on Edward Gain. Story 59. Have you seen the real Griselda? It is a travesty how many miles separate the attractiveness of Sophia and her. It is unreal how that even got past. Story 60. The Sound of Fury. The man in the movie exists, but almost everything else is fictional. Story 61. Most recently, the Iron Claw left far too much out and glossed over so much as to be incredible to those with more than a passing knowledge of the subjects. Story 62. Argo takes many liberties, adding dramatic events that never happened and downplaying the Canadian involvement. Story 63. Midnight Express. There is a Locked Up Abroad episode where Billy Hayes explains what really happened. It is nothing like the movie, which unfairly portrayed Turkey and the Turkish people. Story 64. The Black Donnellys is a television show set in early 2000s New York, based on a true story that happened in rural Canada in the mid-1800s. In the show, the family actually did the act that serves as the catalyst for the story. In reality, the Donnelly family was killed after being falsely accused of a crime, which was practically the only crime in the area that they did not commit. Additionally, the one girl in the real family was changed to a love interest for one of the brothers. Story 65. The Amityville Horror. The story in the book was complete fiction. Story 66. The Fighter. I don't know about the rest of the movie, but the fight at the end with Shay Neary portraying Mickey Ward showed Ward getting pummeled the whole time and then a miraculous knockout in the 8th round. If you watch the actual fight, it looked pretty even by that point, and Ward never looked like he was in any danger of getting knocked down. Story 67. The Conjuring. The Warrens were absolute and total fraudsters. Story 68. Strangers was just based on some people ringing the doorbell of the wrong house, if I am remembering correctly. Story 69. The Blair Witch Project. None of it was faithful to the true story except for some mucus coming out of that girl's nose. Story 70. Fargo totally takes the cake for straying far from the real deal. Despite claiming it is based on a true story, the Coen brothers were just messing around. They completely made up the whole storyline, using the claim as a clever way to make the plot feel more legitimate. Everything in the film, from the characters to the crazy events, is pure fiction, with just a hint of inspiration from some actual crimes. Story 71. Most of the ones released today are about someone from more than 20 years ago. Films are made to cater to modern audiences. Many ideas that existed prior to the 2010s, and therefore in the lives of many subjects of films based on true stories, would not hold up with modern audiences. Things get omitted or rewritten to cater to viewers, which is why all films based on true stories should be taken with a grain of salt. Story 72. Without going into all the conspiracy theories of John F. Kennedy, by the way, no way do I think Lee Harvey Oswald did it. I had a problem with this well-produced movie going along and then, well, it's time to pull together one theory of how it maybe happened. So let me toss Mr. X into the story Sutherland on a park bench, who then just tells us a whole tale from A to B as to why and how this all happened, according to who? Oliver Stone? Then let me bounce from the story again because you, Mr. Lawyer, can't prove anything that I just told you. But you should really believe me because I speak well and I made it make some kind of sense. How convenient. Then play it all against a really well-done production, and we have a whole generation believing this is the truth. I'm not saying he is wrong or right. I just feel he took too much liberty and really fashioned it into yes, this is the truth, what really happened here because I know. Story 73, Don Bluth's Anastasia. I love the cartoon. It was a staple during my childhood and still has some great music. However, there is almost nothing in it that is historically accurate. The Tsar did not banish Rasputin. In fact, they still idolized him until the day they died. Rasputin did not die during the revolution while trying to take revenge on the royal family. He was invited to a house party, poisoned, shot, chased out of the house, shot again, and then dumped into a river. The royal family was not chased from the palace. They surrendered peacefully fairly early on and were held under house arrest until they were taken to a basement and shot to death. Her grandmother, the Dowager Empress Marie, hated Alexandria, Anastasia's mother, and blamed her foolishness for much of the family's troubles. As a random fact, the grandmother was originally royalty from Denmark, and her sister was the Queen of England. Story 74. U-571 is considered one of the least historically accurate films made, to the point that it was condemned by the British government. They did not even get the numbers right. It was U-110 that was the first U-boat to be captured with its Enigma machine intact, and it was the British who were responsible for all but 2 instances of captured naval Enigma machines. The Americans captured U-505 with its Enigma machine in June 1944. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.